Chapter The Seer Beckons. The trio moved out the next morning, Köykkä certain that he would at least reunite the allies with their horses. Through brush and vine, he cleaved forward, pausing only briefly to drink from his waterskin as the heat of the midday sun began making their progress slow. Taking a moment to rest, Seamus once more pressed Köykkä to be truthful of what had been clearly burdening him these years. Throwing down his blades, Köykkä glared violently at Seamus. Fists clenched, he finally eased and uttered, "Fine." Seated upon a fallen tree, Köykkä recounted the tale to the young barbarian. "Lad, you were but a newborn when disaster befell our people," he began. "This nation we find ourselves in wasn't always as it is now. Before the war, these lands were controlled by many different tribes of many different heritages." He sighed, then continued. "Disaster came when the mountain tribe came across relics of a long-forgotten past. Ambition set in as their elders were one by one slain by the upstart who we would come to call King Al'at. The mountain tribe would change their name to the Kairan, which we now know as the Kingdom of Kairdana." A long pause settled over the trio as all had heard the stories of what they later called the Unification War. The war raged on for months, utilizing strange magics born of some lost technological age. The Kairan decimated the lands seeking only complete control. Your father, the chieftain of your tribe, the Kura, was the last to make a stand. The legions your father commanded were too much for the Kairan to truly defeat, but they held them at bay. A truce was struck, but a wall was erected to keep our peoples out. As survivors of the remaining tribes fled the tyranny of Al'at, were pushed northward, and so they lived. But the Kairan weren't satisfied. A finality was required so that none could rise up again. A morning assault, swift, violent, a punctuation to end the conflict once and for all, and in the midst of the assault, your father was slain. My patrol returned the next morning to find the slaughter. You were hidden beneath your mother's handmaiden in the root cellar. From there, I spirited you south, fearing what more could befall our peoples. And here we are. The wind rustled and the forest opened up as the heroes found themselves back at the seer's camp. That night, a ritual was conducted to anoint Seamus in preparation for their journey. Chapter The Ravaging of Cabbages. Returning home, young Seamus was immediately accosted by the townsguard for unthinkable crimes against the newly instated queen. Ensuring his survival at the hands of the guard, the very same captain of the pirate vessel whom was responsible for the journey by sea that Köykkä had booked for their journey north, stood up to task as Köykkä began a series of bribes to get Seamus released. However, it was revealed to the band of allies that Köykkä kept some secrets from the hall. A young boy, with armor equal to Köykkä's, was seen as Köykkä walked the city streets openly in daylight for the first time since the assassination of the king. A son, unknown to all in the hall but one, Seamus. Demanding his father get his sworn protector released from the townsguard, the young boy, known only as Z, showed he was willing to go to battle to protect his father's trusted friend. The folk at the village were taken aback by this boy warrior and the father who so proudly escorted him on his mission to save Seamus. Chapter The Assassin's Patience Ends. Having given Seamus his freedom, Köykkä returned to the hall to find a brief respite from the allies he had amassed. Realizing now that Seamus's tragic past had been laid bare, Köykkä determined he needed a comfort to clear his mind of the troubles of the past. Gathering his arms, he looked over the guild's bounty board and decided he needed to exorcise some angst the best way he knew how. Remembering all who laid prying eyes upon his son, he put together a plan to seek out those whom he knew held ties to the former king. Some muscles need to be flexed to remind you of your abilities after all. Chapter Assassin's End. Through the streets he slipped undetected as he chased his quarry. He knew this would be more challenging than most. Practitioners of the arcane were always a messy job. Dropping silently from the wooden awning over the stables, he drew his blades and went in for what he thought would be a quick kill. But he was wrong. This would be far more challenging than before. Ducking and sidestepping a barrage of minor magics from the caster's outstretched hand, Köykkä slipped in and landed what should have been a killing blow. However, the magical defenses on this man proved far more than he could anticipate. The same kinetic force of his blade flashed back at him in retribution. An open wound laid bare upon his chest. Blood began pooling under his armor as his own attack redirected itself into a biting laceration over Köykkä's heart. In just another moment, it was over. Shadowy tendrils gripped him, pulling his arms wide as the adversary slowly approached, cackling. He knew if he didn't free himself, this would be over, but the strength was being leached from him with every tendril that took a grip. One more step, and the Arcanist's hand, wreathed in some dark necromancy, plunged deep into the chest of Köykkä. As the world slowly fell away, he knew there was no use fighting it. Time began to slow for him, remembering his adventures, the companions at his side through it all. We had a good run, he caught himself thinking as all was at its end. He drew all the strength he had to lift his head back up once more. Be done with it, then. He spit blood with what would be his final living word, as the Arcanist drew forth an unholy abomination from the shadows to pierce the heart and very soul of the assassin. And it all fell away. Days later, the remaining heroes of the hall found his body. Twisted and broken, his body laid flat upon their tavern table while they argued, none knowing how best to proceed without Köykkä's guidance. He was gone. The magic was too strong, and no priest could restore him. The heroes took the body back to the seer, and a vigil was held while the seer slyly smirked at the sight before her. Chapter Unholy Awakening. The sound of scratching and scurrying pervaded the edges of his awareness. The damp smell of stagnant soil filled his nostrils. He could hear the faint crackle of a fire nearby. He felt a cold, unlike anything he had ever known. Not an exterior burden chilling him from without, but a cold emanating from his very core. He also felt light. A burden removed that he never realized had been shackled to his existence. He tried to move, but found his body did not react to his own physical efforts. So this is what the end is, he thought to himself. Remembering stories the elders of his clan told him of the afterlife, he chuckled to himself at their falsehoods. He recounted the moments of his death and felt the cold wash over him again. But within that cold, he found comfort. Accepting this new existence, he let the cold consume him. Piercing into his every thought, memory, emotion, he embraced the welcoming relief of the burden of living. At that moment he heard laughter, slight at first, moving into form until it rang through his senses. Suddenly his eyes flashed open. Through some unnatural sight, he viewed his surroundings in this darkened tomb. He realized that his body now reacted to his will rather than physical effort. Relearning his own body, he rose to his feet. He didn't know what change had transpired, but he would find a way to use this to escape his own tomb. The laughter continued. He would seek its source. Chapter The Homeward Path. He felt his body reacting more to his will as time seemed irrelevant in his dank underground tomb. Through some magical ignition, a wall sconce illuminated his vision as his eyes slowly adjusted to this sudden shift. He heard the laughter take a less disembodied form as he began hearing its lightened tone. He had been haunted for an age at the memories of this light-hearted target of his affections. How long had it been? He pondered as he felt the memories of a life they shared wash over him. Her laughter turned to longing as he could feel her call out to him. What was this place? A space between life and death that would be his prison. He felt anger rise up in him and slammed his fist into the rocky wall of his tomb, only to realize he felt pain on the impact. A light began shining brighter from the sconce until finally taking shape. It was her. While years had passed, he never forgot the delicate, loving look in her eyes. At once, he was taken back to their life together. As if sensing his thoughts, she reached out with a sudden sadness in her eyes and caressed his face. Though he had clearly met his end, he never felt more alive. With a smile, she waved her hand to one of the stone walls and bid him follow her. She stepped through seamlessly, and as he hesitated to follow, he found his form could squeeze through, as if passing through a pudding. He felt it resist him at first, but in this form he was in control. He followed, not knowing what she was leading him to. But he didn't care. He saw her again, and that was the only thing he clung to. Chapter Discord in the Hall. With the death of Köykkä, Seamus fell into despair. His mead horn ever full, he blamed himself for spurning the assassin who had saved him as a child. Ready to take his wrath out on any and all who dared disturb his mourning, he fell deeper and deeper into his self-imposed prison. But something in the hall was stirring, a familiar presence in the air, but none could discern it. All the while, Köykkä watched through eyes that transcended this space between worlds. She beckoned him to follow, so he bid the hall farewell for now as the enchantress from his past led him onward. To what end, he didn't care. This fragile minstrel of his heart was taking him where he needed to be. He knew this as fact. Chapter Resurrection. The world around him tore away with the sound of shredding canvas. A gravitic pull spiraled his awareness into a single form. The sudden eruption of his awareness returned to a corporeal form, caused his once lifeless body to recoil upward as he took his first breath. He found that his sight had remained capable of piercing through the darkness of his tomb. Whatever properties his sight possessed in the afterlife, seeming to be lingering in this new life he had been granted. But more importantly, he remembered everything. His life, every life, the dance of fire he held with her. She had said she would find him this time, and he trusted those words. But he did not know how much time had passed. He had to return to the hall and regroup with his allies. Traversing the outskirts of their home city, he made his way back. But many had already departed. Finding only Mishika, she gave him back his weapons and told the tale of the days that transpired in the wake of his demise. Learning of the grief that had struck Seamus, as well as the allies he had gathered, Köykkä realized that they had embarked on their plotted journey ahead of him. Understanding that time was of the essence, Köykkä knew that he would need passage on a ship to catch up on the 2-week head start his allies had on him. He would need a wayfinder, and he knew just the man to seek.
Finale.
Days had passed, and Seamus felt his anger welling up. The man who had saved him as a child lay dead in his tomb, and there was only one thing left to do. Climbing out of his drunken woes, the young barbarian donned his armor, gathered his weapons, and strode out of the hall to board passage on the seafaring vessel Köykkä had secured for their planned journey north. If he could not seek vengeance on the ones responsible for his mentor's death, then he would seek violence wherever he must and reclaim his homeland. He gazed back at their home one last time as the gathered allies of the hall set out to traverse the Eastern Sea in search of justice for Seamus. Mishika, however, stayed behind. There was some presence in the hall that lingered in her senses, and she knew all was not as it seemed.